Hello and welcome to Misaal. My name is Zahed and I'm your host. On this podcast, I talk candidly with the most innovative minds working towards building a better startup economy in Pakistan. In this second episode of the Misaal podcast, I invite you to listen in on my conversation with Mutaher Khan. He writes for Dawn, the leading English language daily in Pakistan, and covers startups and technology. When he's not writing about startups, he's building Data Darbaar, an online data resource for startups and investors. We talk about startup funding in Pakistan, why he thinks 2020 was a turning point, and what to expect in the new year. Thank you, Mutahir, for joining me on the Misal
I'm
podcast. How are
good.
you?
Thanks, Zahid, for having me.
So, what's going on? How are things in startup land?
Very busy, very active for sure.
Okay, so are there any more funding deals that will be
Yeah,
announced before the end
there
of the
are a
year, or are we
few
done?
that are in the pipeline. There are
Oh,
like I think
really?
maybe uh, three or something. I would say. I mean, it really depends how many of them are going to announce by the end of the year. But
Yeah, so I am keeping I keep changing my list again and again because I have to make a graphic and everything that I do for TechShaw, and then I keep changing it, and I'm like, I really hope this stops very soon because I'm going on a vacation next week, and I really don't want to work or make any updates next week.
me as well.
So
You update the update the chart, and the next day there's a different round, and you have to like two different deals, and then you have to go back all over again, calculate the averages again, and
yes, yes. So yeah, that's been happening a lot, and I mean, it's a good thing that it's happening, but it's difficult to keep up for us who religiously follow this. So I religiously follow it, and I make sure यार कोई miss ना हो जाए और कोई transaction miss ना हो जाए, कोई investor miss ना हो जाए और गलती से कोई प्री सीरीज ए है तो प्री सीड ना बोल दूं इस किस्म की चीज़ें इट्स लाइक गोइंग थ्रू इट मल्टीपल टाइम्स मेकिंग श्योर इट्स ऑल गुड so it's a lot of work so thank you. I know you do a lot of in terms of reporting, you report all these funding transactions for Dawn, and I always enjoy reading whatever you have written, and you provide a lot of insights. So what do you think is going on in terms of startup funding for 2021?
well, that's a very broad question. But I mean, I think if you look at the past 5 6 years or whatever, 2021 was kind of the inflection point. I mean, sure, there was growth before that as well, but 2021 completely changed the steepness of the curve, right? So before that it was
Yes.
40%,
Yeah.
50% growth rate, but that was coming out of a low base. Now that growth rate has gone into like 400% or something. That
Yes,
it's
yes,
it's
it's
completely
very high.
changed. I mean, a couple of things have happened. Sure, amounts have gone up like, incredibly high, but the deal count hasn't
Yeah.
caught up to the same extent. I think that's one of the key reasons. That's one of the key things to note, right? I think
Okay.
it
Yeah.
hasn't even doubled yet. It's like 50% growth, which is again not to say that it's not a healthy rate. It's just not the same extent.
Right. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
a lot of money is being
Yes.
put into the same startups or like a few certain startups. I think when I mean it wasn't I don't know when was it last updated, but I think 60% capital more or less went to five startups when I looked at it at one point.
Yes. So I was also doing something today, and I noticed that too. That वही same startups है जिन्हें maybe January, February, March में जिन्हें funding मिली थी, they are once again raising money, and this time, of course, it's a bigger round, but it's the same startups. So every single funding transaction
Hmm.
that's happening recently has multiple investors. Like there's not one investor. There's so many investors. There are VC firms and angels. So by the time, so when I
Hmm.
let's talk about credit book. So when I saw credit book, Tiger Global, $11 million total combined. Now I'm wondering how much exactly did Tiger Global put in, because of course
Hmm.
that's not a public number. Like, and you would wonder, right? Because there's so many investors in the round. So you would wonder, I'm like, did Tiger Global give them like 4 million, 5 million, maybe less? We don't know that. But it's like so many investors, and I really don't know how much amount each of them is putting in. But I hope it's high because for Tiger Global to make like a $3 or $4 million investment, it's like a rounding error for them. It's not a big deal. But yes, if like let's just say out of 11 million they're putting in 8 9, then it becomes a bigger deal. So do you also see this? Like, what is the
Absolutely.
consensus in terms of this is
I think
happening
there
because
is
of what?
absolutely this trend where, I mean, maybe spare a few deals. I don't know. I mean, you don't really find out the exact cap table, but there's definitely this trend of where even if the round, like the amount, round size is very big, the angel to institutional balance seems a bit off, right? It's more, it
Yes,
seems more angel than institutional. So uh like if we
yes,
take, I mean, we can take Cheetah for example. They didn't even disclose the investors. So that 18 million,
yes,
20 million, whatever that amount was, they never disclosed the
yes,
amount, but
yes, yeah, yeah,
whatever that amount was, we don't know A, the amount, B, the investors. And but
yeah,
we know at least that it wasn't any institution, right?
right, right,
Then the second thing is that, for example, Airlift, the amount was huge,
hmm.
but none of the
Yes,
investors that were participating generally, they generally write 20 million checks, right? So again, there was a lot of,
yeah,
and this we can see uh, based on discussions and everything, that there were a lot of angels participating. I mean,
yes,
I'm sure
yeah,
you know it
yeah.
from
So I
the
mean,
Pakistani community in the US as well. There were lots and lots of angels, and
yeah,
even the announcement, like announced angels, uh, co-founder of Twitter and whatnot. So they were beyond Buckley and beyond 20 VC. They were talking about
yeah,
angels. They were
yeah,
banking
yeah,
on
yeah,
that. There are
yes,
very few investors in
yeah,
Pakistan
yeah.
generally
No, so
who are
what
writing
is?
that, as you mentioned, right? Who are writing that 10 million, 15 million, $20 million checks. And are there any investors doing
Mhm.
even going beyond 10 million? That's the question.
There's a lot of disparity in terms of like angels and VCs and all that stuff. But I'm also like another thing that I'm seeing is so here's something that I've learned from like people I talk to. So what is happening is a lot of US Pakistanis from in the US at least, what they're doing is they are creating a pool of funds and then they're investing. So for example, 20 people, 20 high net worth individuals, because in the US you
Mm,
have to be accredited investor. So 20 of them, 10 of them will get together. They'll collect like maybe, I don't know, 100,000, $200,000. And one of them will take the lead and invest. So when you are reading a report that comes out, it says, you know, uh, ABC VC
mm,
invested in a certain startup. Now that ABC VC, yes, invested their own money, but a lot of money came from these 20 people too. So another thing that's happening is like one of these 20 people, what will happen is, let's just say this one of the 20 people is happens to be an
mm,
executive at some like firm, some tech company. So they'll put in that person's name also, but that person is actually part of the VC investment and he's not like separately putting any money, he's part of the VC. But it makes sense when you are doing a press release to put that person's name. So these are a couple of things that I've noticed that they're happening. Like I don't want to call out people, but that's been happening, and I think it will go on because it generates a lot more hype. So that will keep going on. But all in all, it's been great, I think, 2021. And so let's talk about one challenge that you faced this year where you felt like this is the challenge that these startups will face going
I
forward.
mean, I think the challenge, I think from me, from my view, has always been and will continue to be the overall macroeconomy of Pakistan, which many founders, many
Yeah,
investors either try to ignore or just don't realize. I mean, I think and this is something I'm going to
yeah,
be writing about as well. Like I've actually already written, so here and so. But the thing is, like, if we take Kareem for example, uh, when Kareem entered the market, the interest rates were pretty low, 525 or 575. I don't remember exactly. Dollar was at like
mhm,
100 rupees or something. That's when they entered the market, and
yeah, yeah,
I mean, not
yeah,
to nothing to take away from their efforts and their success, but the macroeconomy was favorable at the time. But
Different.
fast
Yeah, yeah,
forward
yeah,
2 years, 2.5 years, and when it started unraveling, you can see where Kareem ended up. So if any
yeah,
startup
yeah,
is focusing on the local consumers, there have to be a growth in the local consumers as well. When their purchasing power is
yeah,
not going up, or in fact the real incomes are
yeah.
going down, which consumers are you targeting,
Yes.
right? So sure, e-commerce will continue to grow. There's no question about that. But how much of that is just changing of the pie than growing of the pie? So if you have, for example,
Yeah,
Cardi
yeah, yeah.
that sells 100 million through its, the Cardi sells 100 million, and of which only 10% goes through the e-commerce online channels. And now that, and Cardi sales are more or less flat, let's say retail sales are flat. But
Right.
okay, yeah, the e-commerce transactions next year come out at 30 million. So even though the overall company is still flat, what good is that
Yeah, yeah,
e-commerce?
yeah,
Sure, in the short term it will be good enough, but the next, maybe
yeah.
next 7 8 years down the line, it wouldn't really matter. And this is what's happening. So whether you talk about even transport and logic, like mobility startups, anything that's consumer focused, that they are going to face this challenge.
Yeah.
E-commerce, Daraz had this problem last year in 2020. Their growth was more or less flat. And BRK even said
Okay.
it on record. Bangladesh outpaced us in terms of e-commerce, in terms of growth. I don't know if it was in terms
Mm.
of GMV, but in terms of growth, they outpaced us. So this is definitely
Right.
a serious crisis that, I mean, again, founders unfortunately cannot do anything about, like, I think in the end.
Thing like you mentioned Kareem, right? So Kareem, like I was not. So I used to be at Uber. I was not at Uber when the Kareem deal went through, but I was there right before it. So I had. I mean, I have an idea in terms of like what the their mindset was. So before Uber was going for IPO, they just wanted to look good, right? Like they wanted to look good on paper. So for them, the entire spiel was we have the market share, like we own the market. Like that was their entire spiel. So if you have that kind of a mindset and if that's what you want to project to people, so that made sense for them to acquire Kareem. Now on the Kareem side, I remember extremely well Mudassir Sheikha and all the C-suite executives. Any interview they gave right before the acquisition, they were like, "We want to IPO. We will IPO one day. We'll IPO in Dubai and all that stuff." And suddenly they sell. I think what they realized is like they had taken so many investors that the exit opportunities for them were very limited. In Dubai or even in, for example, Saudi Arabia, they would not be able to get the amount of money that the investors put in. So investors would never greenlight the deal. So they sold it to Uber. So that brings me to this second. I mean, the question I want to ask is, so same thing is happening right now. Like all these startups are raising money. Recently, there's a startup, I'm not going to name it. They announced that they raised money, but they didn't say what the amount of money they raised. They said they are valued at $40 million. Now, if you know Pakistani Stock Exchange, not that many companies can exit there, at least these startups, and get that same amount of money for the for the investors. So what are they going to do in a couple of years? Where do you think it's going? Where will they exit, or where? What is their
I absolutely
what is their game plan?
100% agree with you. I even wrote a piece on this. Like, sure that there's more money coming into the ecosystem, but there has to be an exit route down the line, right? Okay, sure, not now, but 7 8 years down the line. But I don't think the Pakistani Stock Exchange is going to change. I don't really. I have a serious trust deficit in the brokerage industry. I have a serious trust deficit in the people running in the, I mean, the way it's run, right? And for an exit to
Yeah,
happen, and generally we don't have a product culture, right? So these high valuations are commanded by product based companies. None of the service based companies are doing
Yes.
anything like this, right? They're generally what, five
Yeah.
times EBITDA or something. The service companies, which is
Yeah.
something that the local exchange has more, can has appetite for. Recently, I think we saw the
Correct. Yeah.
IPO
Yeah.
of Octopus Digital, where maybe it was an investment banking fault or whatever. They didn't price it right, but anyway, the issue was oversubscribed by 27 times, and it was oversubscribed within the first hour or
Okay.
something. So as far as the service-based industry is concerned, there is demand. But that service-based industry at the end of the day is not driven by fundamentals of Pakistani economy. It's driven by the fundamental of the export economy. Those are different.
Right.
So there is more certainty, right? There's
Two
definitely
different
more
things.
certainty. There's more growth,
Yeah.
because systems we can see has been growing at like 30-35% CAGR, uh, and sustainably. And which is the only good example. I wouldn't take obviously TRG, or I wouldn't take NetSol. With like, NetSol has grown, but again, I have uh, systems is a very good example, and the kind of inspiration that can be
Right.
for service based companies. But when it comes to
Right.
startups that are raising money, so the first route is, let's theoretically, the first route is IPO, and the second route is M&A, right? So even on the M&A side, ha- can we really see much activity? So that's the key question.
Hmm.
We did see two exits technically, Share and
Yeah. Yeah.
Edmetrics. Sure, they got acquired, but the
Yes.
key question. I mean, I'm pretty
Yeah.
sure those were stock deals rather than any exchange of cash. And okay, very
Yeah.
early startups can be eaten up that way, but the exit has to be really at a scale. So number one,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so exit generally around the world, exit activities led by local business groups. I mean, you can have, like, sure, you can have
Yes.
one or few Middle Eastern or Southeast Asian startups enter the Pakistani market by acquiring one of the major tech players, but again, that activity will at the end of the day be limited. For it to be sustainable, for it to be healthy and consistent, it has to be. Uh,
Yeah.
I mean, local businesses have to take an interest, but again, local businesses are not going to be paying hundreds of millions of dollars for practically no user base, right?
Yeah, so when I look at these deals, I see it's an
Mm.
acqui-hire, right? It's like an exit, but it's mostly for talent. So the startup in the Middle East, wherever it is, it's wants the Pakistani market share, so it will
Mm.
acquire a local player. It's mostly like you said, it's a stock deal. No money exchanges hands. Like there's nothing really happens. Like in terms of value creation, is like nothing has happened. What the bet is that these startups that are really really small startups will bring the talent in, maybe bring the market information, like the knowledge of market knowledge, will they'll bring that, and they'll use that to help the Middle Eastern player expand a little bit more. So those exits are like, I wouldn't say
Mm.
they make any dent, and they are just exits for the namesake. And that's pretty much what's been happening. And I think um, I still think it's maybe a year or 2 years. If we don't see an exit, then there could be some issues
Correction.
in terms of
Yeah.
follow on funding. And I think it's a great time for startups to just jump in and raise as much money as possible, because money is cheap. You should raise money when you don't need it. And I think that's what many
And
startups
that's
might be
that's the
doing
moral
even
hazard
right now,
problem, right? I
where
think
they're
startups are raising
yeah.
beyond their needs, and from what I
Yeah.
see, that literally takes away any need for efficiencies. There's so when there is
Yeah.
no need for efficiency to begin with, then your approach of running a business is
Yeah.
completely different. It's more like, yeah, sure, let me draw a good salary, let me build a good office, and just have the life of well, the time
Yeah.
of my life,
Yeah.
and see where things go. It's that kind
Yeah.
of environment, like from what I see.
Yeah, so I mean, you mentioned salary. So how is the talent situation like? Like, is the talent easy to get? Because it seems like these
Yes,
startups are having a
yes,
really hard
yes.
time attracting people. So where are people going? Like, I thought there are not enough jobs in Pakistan in terms of like the tech. So most of the people leave Pakistan to go work for other, other places. So what is the talent crunch there? Like, is it like more easy to get a job in the maybe work remotely in the US, and then to maybe physically go into
So I
the
think
office of one of these
that's
startups?
we can, like, if we're talking about tech talent, like there are three kinds of players competing for the good resources, right? First, it's the software houses that generally
Okay.
pay the shittiest. Uh, I mean, it's not
Okay.
like they were bad jobs until a year or so ago, honestly. They were decent jobs with like
Okay.
good
Okay.
increments and consistent growth. So it wasn't like they were bad jobs
Uh-huh.
comparatively. And then
Yeah.
came the startups, venture funded startups, which were in urgent need of talent to look after product development and whatever, all of their engineering roles and whatnot. And they started
Hmm.
poaching the uh, resources, and obviously these companies have money, so they are willing to bid a
Yeah.
much higher salary, like sometimes even go like 2x,
Yeah.
2.5x of the market rates. So this is completely
Yes.
normal at the moment. And then you have is certain developers, like some good tech resources who can easily get into any remote startup in the US. And obviously the salaries are far better. So
Yeah.
even if you're venture funded, even if you have for more money than any company in Pakistan, you're still not immune from this crunch, because there's always a better
Okay.
paid company in the US. Like even if not more well
Yes.
funded, but at least their salary structures are much higher. So that's the problem. I think
Right.
for the
Right.
good talent, like the good talent can easily find a job anywhere. They are not really bound by geography anymore.
Okay.
So it's that good talent is, and that pool is very limited. So you can, the WordPress developer may be still struggling to find a good job and would probably be at the
Okay.
salary like, or at like 1.5x the salary they were compared to 3 years ago. But for that, let's say a very good
Okay.
product architect, uh, jumping the job is not
Uh-huh.
really a problem. And Pasha did a survey in 2021, which showed that the annual turnover rate jumped to 30% in 2021. And it was even higher. I
Okay.
think in Karachi, it was like 36% or something. Uh, uh, so
Okay. Okay. That's a
last
really
year,
high
last
turnover
year
rate. I
turnover
mean,
rate was
people are
18%.
just
So the annual, it
okay.
jumped by 12 percentage points.
That's how the market is. I mean, suddenly there's
And
less
this is
talent,
this is
more
what's
money,
happening everywhere, right? So it's
and the
not
startups
Pakistan.
are
Nigeria is facing the same problem.
yeah.
India is facing the same problem. Like, I think there was a very good story I read on India. The guy used to be working at like 9 or 10 lakh a year, and his next salary was like 1 crore or something.
Yeah, so that those are the kind of things that they're happening here too. So here, like a lot of people now, because you have worked from home here, and a lot of people now are like so much. The demand is so high. They can work two jobs from their home, so they can have
Mm,
one full time employment and then one another contract opportunity where they are maybe
mm,
working like after hours. So there are just too many jobs out there for
mm.
people who want to work. Where do you, I mean, I know you touched on this a little bit, but what do you see happening in 2022 in terms of funding? Do you think we have like Series B and Series C more, or are we still going to be stuck with
I
like Series A, and new startups will come out and they'll raise the same
so
amount of
I
money?
think, I mean, obviously the seed pipeline will continue to build. The seed and pre-seed pipeline will continue to build. I
Okay.
think. I mean, this because again, we'll probably see a lot more Wapistanis talking about disrupting the Pakistani market. We'll definitely see lots of
Yes.
those,
Yes.
that
Yeah.
I can guarantee. And raising like,
Yeah.
I don't know,
Yeah.
3 million at just fluff. So we can be
Yeah,
expected for
yeah,
that.
yeah.
For Series C, I think three Series C rounds are not out of like beyond the realms of possibility. That's completely possible. Maybe a couple of Series B, maybe Series B would, like, because Series A pipeline is not that big for us to really see
Yeah.
that many Series B. But Series A pipeline is like seed pipeline is currently big enough for us to have, because I think this year saw 40 44 something like around 40ish seed deals. So that
Yeah.
we can see somewhere around, wait, what, 15, 12, 15 Series A deals. That's
What do you think will happen if a startup has raised so much money at a high valuation? Like, for example, at seed, if they're like at 50 million, 40 million valuation, and come Series A, Series B, they have to keep going up. What happens
there's a,
if they
there's a,
can't go higher? They have to
I
do a
think
down
I think
round.
that
Like, what do you
there's a
think will
very
happen?
good likelihood of that. Like, there's a very good chance that will happen if any investor is actually doing due diligence.
Uh-huh.
I I for one cannot believe that.
Uh-huh.
Like, there are certain verticals where there is growth, but again, overall, I think down rounds are going to happen eventually, because again, Pakistani consumer market is not big enough
Hmm.
for us to not have a down round.
Hmm.
I mean, unless the
Hmm.
investor is
Yeah.
willing to, investor doesn't have any investment thesis or any care for any regard for numbers, then maybe sure we might not see it. But like, if I were looking at a deal, and I know this is the way, this is the kind of
Yeah.
growth that should be there for it to justify such a valuation, or to continue to keep that
Hmm.
valuation track or that funding track. There definitely has to be a down round. This is something I genuinely believe, because again, 20, 30x multiples are not really justified in my opinion. And obviously, it's not my money, so it's not my place to justify that. If there are investors who
Yeah.
think that it's justified, good for them. But the macroeconomic issues stay, no matter what. And
Yeah.
this is what
Yeah.
a lot of Pakistani founders talk about, or investors talk about examples from other emerging markets. And what I personally don't understand, and I ask them, is that a Pakistani market is fundamentally different from most other emerging markets. Even from macroeconomic perspective, emerging markets generally have a trade surplus rather than a trade deficit. They generally have lots of reserves in their external account. They keep their currency devalued by choice, uh, right? So
Yeah.
all of these fundamentals are very
Yeah.
different, uh, and they consistently have growth rates upwards of 5%. None of those check boxes uh, are crossed by us. That's one thing. And the second thing is, we don't have, like, for example, India. If we look at India, I'm sure, maybe India is not the best comparable, and I agree. But Indian activity was not limited to tech. They had functioning capital markets where individual, like, good companies could go and raise money long before the tech boom came
Yeah.
in. Right? Tech obviously had a role, but they had oil and gas giants, they had insurance giants, they had all other giants. Same for Indonesia. Petrochemicals is a very good
Yeah.
business. Pakistan never really saw those giants, so it was we never
Yeah.
had any big players. Like, okay, maybe there are like
Yeah.
few handful of
That's true.
Pakistani companies which you can think of. Imtiaz would be one company that's sure. Uh, Maybe if it goes to the market today, it can raise whatever money uh, you want, right? Because that's everyone knows what it has done, and everyone believes in that story. I think you it would be hard to find a detractor. Pakistan doesn't have that stories.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
India did. India had, again, so tech alone can do only so much. There has to be a supporting ecosystem. Other
Yeah.
sectors have to play a role as well. So, if, for example, retail sector as a whole is not doing well, e-commerce's growth will also be limited. If if the home
Correct.
appliances get expensive after every slight movement in the rupee, then the
Hmm.
electronics appliances e-commerce will also be impacted. It has to be manufacturing as well. There
Yeah.
has to
Yeah.
be
Definitely.
a local business beyond tech. It cannot just function on you can't.
Yes.
Technology is a channel for most e-commerce. Like for, I mean, I'm taking e-commerce very broadly right now. Anything, any transaction that happens over the internet, let's
Hmm.
if we're calling that e-commerce rather than the more narrow definition, then if the whole economy is
Yeah.
shrinking, sure, you once you pivot, once you readjust the pie to online channels, then you're done. What after that?
The reason I think India is a fair comparison. I mean, of course, people don't agree with me, but I think India is a fair comparison, and there's a reason for that. The biggest reason is when these startups are going to raise money, they are saying we are like this startup in India. So if that startup in India is worth this much today, we might also be worth this much someday because we have the same market dynamics, same culture, same this, same that. So if all these startups are going and saying to investors that we can one day be India in 5 years from now, then I think it's very
You
fair for us
hold
to
them to
also
the
compare it
same
to India.
yardstick.
So
Yeah.
that's you also mentioned that India already had the capital market. So India had a stock exchange, Bombay stock exchanges. They had other companies besides, like Hamari companies
Mm,
may you have cement, you have oil,
mm.
you have banks. That's it. That's all we have, right? So in tech, that's you can't just have that. You have to have a lot more. So the entire culture, like you said, like the expecting the stock exchange to build up trust so that the common person invests in it, that's not going to happen in Pakistan. I just don't think so, right? And but that is not the case in India because they already know that they already invested in the stock market. Indians already invested in the stock market way before
Absolutely.
startups came to be. So we are playing catch up. And so for that reason, I find it extremely difficult that one has to wonder how exactly will all these startups eventually exit. And if they don't end up exiting, like what's going to become of them? Are they just going to, move to a different country? Recently, like I mean, you must have heard this too, that
Mm.
Airlift is expanding to South Africa. Now, I don't understand why would Airlift expand to South Africa. Maybe like maybe they know something that I don't. But what do you think? Like, do you have any insights on why these startups are like expanding to some random country?
I
Is
think
there a
I think
reason
they're
or like
basically
what's going on?
they have to justify their raise, so they need to spend as well. So
Okay.
because they need to again raise, they need to raise again. So I think that the key reason was like for Pakistani market, the issue is that the key issue is that volumes are not there, especially at the
Yeah.
price point a lot of startups operate at, right? And this is a
Yeah.
fact, right? E-commerce in Pakistan generally would be more expensive than traditional retail. So if I want a t-shirt and I go to like a decent e-commerce store, forget like except for the export leftovers and whatnot. Like if I want a sweatshirt, uh, I'll go to an e-commerce store and I'll be getting maybe a price of 1,200 rupees or something for a sweatshirt. And if I go to Zainab Market, I'll get that and for 500, 600 maybe. So I'm saving more than half or half at least, uh, just by going to the retail
Yeah.
store. And obviously neither of them are brands, right? We're not even talking about branded space here. So it's not like
Yeah.
आइडियाज के ऊपर वो 1200 का मिल रहा है. मैं एक रैंडम ई कॉमर्स स्टोर की बात कर रहा हूँ जो कि किसी
Hmm.
मेरी उम्र के लड़के ने ही शुरू कर लिया था. उससे कहा था कि ई कॉमर्स का अच्छा धंधा है तो उसने भी शुरू कर लिया. तो उसके बावजूद उनके प्राइस
Hmm.
इतनी जनरली ई कॉमर्स में हर चीज की प्राइसेस ज्यादा है तो वॉल्यूम्स आएंगे नहीं क्योंकि अगेन दिस इज अ प्राइस सेंसिटिव मार्केट एंड एवरीवन नोज दैट. Every founder who has scaled, they
Yeah.
know that Pakistan is a very price sensitive market. The moment you stop discounts, you see the volumes drop. So everyone knows that. I think it's
Yeah.
just that
Yeah.
maybe they're deluding themselves or they have to delude themselves or be optimistic at least that. to keep functioning. Because if you maybe accept if you take a pessimistic approach, like maybe then you wouldn't be getting into that business, right?
The startup game is all about, positivity and, like, looking at a big picture and doing good for the world and all that. So they have to convince themselves that, एक दिन, बहाली आएगी, and, हमारे भी वारे न्यारे होंगे, and etc. So yeah, that's
So
just
coming
how the
back
game is played. So
coming back to
we
this, the
can't.
question you actually
Yeah,
asked, right? So अगर हम एयरलिफ्ट की बात करें, I think
yeah,
what like this is not based on any discussion with them. This is just my sentiment of what Airlift is trying to do. So Airlift is,
yeah,
I mean, they are growing. They are growing well. That I know, that I can see, because they are spending a lot as well. Like every time I open a couple of apps, there's no way on earth that I don't see Airlift ads. So they're spending like crazy. That's for sure. On Sharif you can see billboards and whatnot. Uh, but I mean, they are obviously growing off a low base right now. And I'm pretty sure for them, the issue is that
yeah.
since at the end of the day, the volumes are going to be a problem, so they need to increase the average order value. And average order value,
Yeah.
again, in Pakistan, that it's completely different from maybe South Africa. So I think the it's driven by a need to increase that average, from my understanding. And this is a good example of
Hmm.
why Airlift is trying to increase the AOV. I think what they recently did was and started selling mobile phones. So 30,
Okay.
selling you a smartphone in 30 minutes. That's I mean, there can be only one reason for that. There's otherwise no one needs a smartphone in 30
Yeah.
minutes. It takes a lot more to actually do the research,
30
right?
minutes. Yeah. Yes.
So
Yes.
I think
Exactly.
so. Pakistani
Yeah.
startups have some of the Pakistani startups that who think that they can raise as much as regional peers. They feel that in order to increase their GMV, it's better to actually expand to other markets where dynamics are better, where averages are better, and
Okay.
pump up your numbers, basically get most of your value, extract most of your values from those market, and maybe operate Pakistan as an engineering hub, or low cost hub. And even honestly, it's not even low cost anymore if you're paying 2.5
It's no
x the
low cost.
salaries.
Yeah. It's not low cost.
So
Yeah.
that's that. So it's kind of,
Yeah.
we are not doing, like, maybe I'm too pessimistic again, but I mean that competitive advantage of cost is not really adding up to the same extent. If
Yeah.
especially if you're venture funded, that's
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
for venture funded companies.
No, so Airlift, have you heard anything if they will go back to the van pool
No, I
business, or
think
they're just
Usman
done with
Gul
it?
was very open about it, to the extent of even naivety, when he said, right.
Yeah.
I think in his Bloomberg interview, he said that we were not even convinced of our own business model. And Prophet did a very funny satirical on this, that
Oh yeah, yeah,
airlift,
yeah, yeah. I remember. I
airlift,
remember. I
airlift
remember what you're
pivots
talking
to
about. Yeah,
selling
yeah, yeah.
100 rupees notes for 75 rupees. So
I always have a hard time. Swivel, yeah, swivel. Okay, yeah. So when that came into the market, I think it was like, I mean, I guess it would have been a really, difficult situation for Airlift to begin with. I think it was a COVID was like maybe a blessing for them
yeah,
that
swivel, like
happened, and they're like, oh, you know what,
even swivel,
let's
I
expand.
don't think they're really that big in the, at least in the consumer space, right? So they're I think
Okay,
after COVID, they started focusing more on corporates. And basically, I mean, back in the day, like just before COVID hit, you could see Swivel, you could see Airlift, because obviously both of them had plenty of money at the time. They were trying to get a user base, so you could see one van after another in the key hotspots, right? So on Sharif Faisal, you'll see bus if you're there in the evening. But I mean, now you can maybe, if you travel a lot, like if you commute a lot within the city, you will see maybe one or two civil buses like during a day, which is
Okay.
again for that much money. I don't think it's that kind of presence is justified. Like I would expect a much bigger presence.
Okay. So this is, yeah, very, very true. With Baikea, yeah, I have not heard anyone say anything bad about them, like in anything in the bad light, like, just they're doing this badly or that badly. It's like I've only heard good things. So that's very, very, um, I would say that's very encouraging, that there is a startup that is doing so well that people are happy with the product, the employees are
Absolutely, I think
happy, and all those things. So
Baikia is, in my view at least, is the poster boy of Pakistani tech startup scene, right? So, and they've gone, they've
yeah,
paid their dues. Honestly, when they came in, they had to go for a local investor. They had to give a major stake, and they had, and then they got VCs, Sarmayakar and MEVP initially. They got the cap table
yeah,
restructured. They had to go through that. Even at the time, there was no Munib was not a Munib was a like Pakistani citizen. He didn't have any citizenship, any foreign citizenship, right? So him being on the cap table of a foreign holdco was not possible at the time. They went through that, and then
yeah,
and it's like
yeah,
it was the first app in Pakistan that was in Urdu. So from day one, they were targeting masses. They were not targeting Clifton and defense, right? And that's the key difference in Baikya and most other startups.
yeah,
The others, they are trying to solve problem for
yeah,
their selves. Like a lot of them, not all of them, obviously.
yes,
Baikya is actually
yeah,
solving a problem like that affects everyone in Karachi, at least in any urban center for that matter. And and this is how Munib's mind works, right? If you interact with him, he's
yeah,
constantly fixated on solving something. In even in your discussions, okay, this is the problem. How we can work about around it. So this is the way he operates.
right,
It's not that, oh,
okay,
we are going for our next raise or we are doing that, right? So it's this is the problem. That problem can be in the product. Oh, we need to ensure, let's say, they have to be two touches just to get to this point, right? Like for whatever that product issue is, and he'll be fixated on that. He'll be
yeah,
brainstorming. He'll be just walking around his room and talking to people. And this is the reason Baikia is very different. A, they went for the masses, and B, Munib is a brilliant guy. I mean, I don't think you can find anyone. There are very few people who can match Munib's caliber.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that's mostly what I've heard about him personally, as well as Baikea as a product. That only good things. Like so far, I mean, even in circles where I am, like, been with people who are just talking shit about startups, even in those circles they will not say anything bad about Ikea, because they've just not had a bad experience, or the product works, or they don't know someone who has complained. So it's a very, like, it's an effect where it shows, right? Like, all these startups keep coming into, like, the limelight, but one startup that is silently doing good work, it does not come in the limelight, is, like, Baikea. So I know we're on the top of the hour, so let's just do this. Um, Before leaving, tell me a
Mm.
startup, up and coming startup, that maybe they raised money this year or maybe previously. What is one startup that you feel has an opportunity to go big? I mean, I wouldn't say unicorn, because
Yeah, I don't
unicorn
know.
is
I
really
don't know.
far
Like,
out right now. But what one startup do you feel like will be, like, up and coming, and it's going to
right.
do
I think
good
Baikia
things?
generally has been my answer for a lot of these, but I think Baikia currently, from what I understand, they need to figure out like because ride business has sort of plateaued, and they need to figure out the delivery side of it. So if Baikia figures out deliveries, Baikia has a very
Okay.
good chance to be one of the biggest companies. Uh, and like maybe
Yeah.
again, I'm not in terms of scale, in terms of being a market leader. There's another startup which I think has done very well. Uh, Maybe you cannot even call it a traditionally. It's not. I don't know if you can call it a startup even for that matter, because it's. I mean,
Okay.
I don't know if you know of Trax Logistics.
I've heard of them. Yes.
No,
They
that was Blue
IPO'd,
X.
right?
That was
They
Blue X.
are the one who IPO'd.
Blue X is a competitor.
The Blue X.
Blue X
Okay,
is much
it was
older
Blue
than
X. Okay,
Trax. So Trax
okay,
is another company that, like, I personally really admire. Basically, IBL
okay,
Group, the International Brands Limited, which is a local business group, invested in them. Uh, the
okay,
founder previously
okay,
has made an exit on a cash on delivery startup. He sold it. I think he started
okay,
it during his undergrad days. He sold it to ARY. Basically, got hired. It didn't work out, and then he basically
okay,
got an arrangement with IBL Group and started Tracks. And I've seen personally the way they've grown over the past 2 years. So I think first time when I met them was in 2019, towards the end of 2019, like November or something like that.
okay,
Uh, and they were, at the time they were still like
okay,
400 people, including the fleet deliveries and fleet guys, all the riders, all the uh, drivers, and everyone. And I met them
okay,
a year later afterwards. They were around 1,200 or something people. And then the next time I
okay.
met them, like 5, 6 months later, they were around
That's a
1,500 people. So, and even if you
okay.
look at Blue X's prospectus, Blue X gives tracks, I think, a 10 or
Mhm.
11% market share. Uh, and that doesn't
Okay,
that's not exclusively for e-commerce, right? So in the overall logistics business, they've already gotten a 10 to 11%. Obviously their primary business is e-commerce. So if you look at the e-commerce fulfillment market, the market share would maybe 15-20%,
mhm.
could go up to 20% probably. And it's like 3 years old company.
Yeah,
The founder is again brilliant. You can ask him anything about the logistics thing. Again, he's fixated on how to do things better, what to add. Like, they started omni-channel warehousing as well, for example. Uh, so something like plug and play warehousing, right? So they had that as well.
okay.
So keep iterating with different solutions. So
So has the tracks like raised money like outside
no,
venture capital money, or
I
they're
think
only like private?
there was this transaction again. There was something happening, like a local private equity group was doing a transaction with them. Again, I don't know the details of that, but there was something definitely happening
Details.
there.
Okay. Okay.
Uh,
So this is really strange. Like there is a company out there that is servicing the e-commerce sector, but it's still not showing or talking about itself as if it's a tech company. So
No,
that's
they
very
do
like
talk about
it's very
they do talk
different
about
because
tech, like being a
usually
as a tech player, but it's just that I don't think they have gone for the VC route. Maybe it could be the reason could be is
okay,
that they are backed by IBL, which is a local business group. They don't, maybe there's a control perspective, but again, if you're growing well, then it doesn't matter if you have
yeah,
gone
you
the
don't need
VC
it.
route or not, right? Maybe for VCs, it's actually up
Yeah,
to VCs for to convince them, because it's a good company. That's for sure. We've seen deals in Rider. We've seen deal in Postex, and Trax is a bigger player than Rider, at least. That uh, it's like twice,
yeah,
thrice as much market share as Rider. So so again, VCs
yeah,
have to. It's VCs, not just Pakistani VCs, and foreign VCs also have to pursue a deal as well. It's not like someone sent you a deck. So your pool of investment
yeah.
is not the companies that sent you the deck. It's the pool of companies that operate in the market, and you
Right,
pursue them
right.
as well. There has to be it has to be both ways.
Well, thank you for being on the Misal podcast. Thank you for your time.
Glad
I
to be here.
appreciate it.
Glad to be here. So
Thanks for listening to the Misal podcast. I hope you enjoyed the podcast and will thank me by writing a review or sharing it on social media. Make sure you follow and subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. Thanks again. See you soon.